So you've got a kingdom in absolute crisis. On one side of the empire, a powerful king is literally dying from grief and regret over a war he can no longer control. And on the other side, well, that very same war, a rebellion that everyone thought was finished, has just roared back to life, and it's threatening to rip his entire empire apart. For this part of the story, we're basically going to be in two places at once. We'll be watching King Antiochus IV during his last miserable days out in Persia. But at the same time, we're going to keep our eyes on the escalating war back in Judea, where every single victory for the rebels pushes the king and his kingdom that much closer to collapse. Okay, before we dive any deeper, let's get a handle on who's who in this whole mess. First, you've got Antiochus IV. He's our dying king. His son becomes the new boy king, Antiochus V. Then there's Lysias. He's the general on the ground who basically crowns the new king and makes himself the regent. But here's where it gets juicy. You've also got Philip, a friend of the dying king, who gets appointed as the official guardian. So right away, you've got a rivalry brewing for control of the throne. And, of course, driving all the action is Judas Maccabeus, the leader of the Jewish rebellion. These dynamics right here are going to fuel everything that happens next. All right, so let's put ourselves in King Antiochus' shoes for a second. He's way out in Persia, and he's got this plan to sack the famous temple at Elymas. Get some much-needed cash to pay for his wars. But it's a total disaster. The locals fight him off, and just when he thinks things can't get any worse, as he's retreating, a messenger shows up with some truly awful news from back home. His armies, led by his top general, Lysias, had been completely smashed by the Jewish rebels. And the news isn't just bad, it's a complete catastrophe. We're talking about a total reversal of fortune here. It's not just a loss, it's a humiliation. Lysias' army was chased away. The rebels now have the empire's own advanced weapons. They've torn down the pagan altar Antiochus set up in the temple, and they've already rebuilt the walls around the sanctuary and other key cities. You have to understand, for the king, this is it's unthinkable. The news literally breaks him, physically and mentally.
So the king gets incredibly sick, and right there on his deathbed, he has this moment of shocking clarity. He looks at his friends and basically confesses. He says, "I get it now. All these troubles, they're because of what I did." He directly connects his own suffering and his death to the terrible things he did in Jerusalem, admitting he did it all without a cause.
So with his last breath, in the 149th year of the kingdom, Antiochus tries to make one last play. He calls over his buddy Philip, hands him the crown and his royal ring, and tells him to raise his son to be the next king. But, and this is a huge but, back in the capital, Lysias has already crowned the kid, Antiochus V, and named himself the regent. So the king's death doesn't fix anything. Nope. It just lights the fuse on a brand new crisis, a power vacuum with two powerful men ready to tear the empire apart to rule it.
Now, while the whole empire is teetering on the brink of a civil war, Judas Maccabeus and his crew back in Judea, they have no idea any of this is happening. All they see is an opportunity, a moment of weakness, and they decide it's time to push their advantage. So a year passes, it's the 150th year now, and Judas decides to go after the tower in Jerusalem. And you gotta understand, this thing wasn't just some guard post. It was this massive fortress, packed with enemy soldiers and local sympathizers, sitting right next to the temple. It was this constant, infuriating symbol of everything they were fighting against. Judas hauls in the siege engines and gets ready to wipe it off the face of the earth. But a few of the pro-Seleucid guys managed to slip out during the siege. And where did they go? Straight to the new kid king, Antiochus V. They make this incredibly desperate appeal. They're basically saying, hey, we stayed loyal to your dad, and now our own people are killing us and stealing our stuff. You have to do something, and you have to do it now, before this rebellion gets too big to handle.
Well, that does the trick. The young king and his court are absolutely furious. And the response? It's swift, and it is massive. Lysias pulls together all his top commanders to build an army bigger than anything Judea has ever seen. This isn't about putting down an uprising anymore. This is about total annihilation.
I mean, just look at the sheer scale of this army. It's mind-boggling. 100,000 infantry, 20,000 cavalry, and the ultimate superweapon of the ancient world, 32 war elephants. This isn't just an army, folks. It's a walking engine of destruction.
Yeah, let's talk about those elephants for a second. 32 of them. These were the tanks of their day. And as if they weren't scary enough, they had this really brutal trick to get them ready for battle. They'd show the elephants the juice of grapes and mulberries to make them think of blood, whipping them into an absolute killing frenzy. And get this, each elephant wasn't just on its own, it was the core of a whole battle group. For every single one of these beasts, you had 1,000 armored foot soldiers and 500 elite cavalrymen running alongside it. Then, strapped to its back, a big wooden tower, supposedly stuffed with another 32 fighters, all controlled by a single driver. The whole thing was basically a living, breathing, trampling fortress. The original text even has trouble finding the words to describe what this looked like. It says when this army was on the move, the sun hitting all those thousands of gold and brass shields made the mountains themselves glitter and shine like lamps of fire. Can you even imagine seeing that coming towards you? The sheer terror of it. So, despite being impossibly outnumbered, Judas Maccabeus isn't backing down. He marches his army out to meet this monster of a force at a place called Bath Zacharias. The stage is set for a truly epic and brutal confrontation. And right in the middle of all this chaos, a warrior named Eleazar spots something. He sees one elephant that's just bigger than the others, decked out in royal gear. And he makes this huge assumption. The king has to be on that one. In his mind, if he can just take out that one elephant, he might be able to end the whole war, right then and there. And what he does next is just one of the most incredible acts of pure courage you'll ever hear about. He decides he's going to risk it all to make a perpetual name for himself. He just charges straight into the thick of the enemy, cutting down anyone in his way until he gets to this gigantic elephant. He then slides underneath its belly and just thrusts his sword straight up into the beast. He kills it, but as the massive animal comes crashing down, it crushes Eleazar, killing him instantly. So, in a way, Eleazar got what he wanted. He took down the beast, and he definitely earned his place in history. But his heroic sacrifice just wasn't enough. When the rest of the Jewish army saw the raw, unstoppable power of the king's forces, especially those elephants, their spirit just broke. They turned and retreated from the battlefield. The king's army doesn't let up. They chase the rebels all the way back to Jerusalem, cornering them in the sanctuary on Mount Zion, and that's where they lay siege. It really looks like this is it. The rebellion is trapped, and it's only a matter of time. Inside the walls, things get desperate and fast. The royal army is just hammering the fortifications with everything they've got. The Jews are fighting back, sure, but they have a much, much bigger problem. They're out of food. It just so happened to be a sabbatical year, which meant by law, no crops were planted or stored. So famine sets in, and the number of defenders just dwindles until there's almost no one left. And right at that moment, when Lysias and the young king are on the very brink of victory, a messenger arrives. And the news from home is an absolute bombshell. It's Philip, their rival for the throne. He's back from Persia, he's got the old king's army with him, and he has already taken over the capital city. Suddenly, Lysias is in an impossible position. He pulls the king and his commanders aside and just lays it all out for them, cold and simple. He's like, look, this siege is draining our resources, we're low on food, and while we're stuck here, we're losing the whole kingdom back home. So what's his solution? It's a complete 180. Let's just make peace. He actually suggests letting the Jews live by their own laws again, the very thing they've been fighting this bloody war to prevent. Amazingly, the king and his princes agree. They swear a sacred oath. The starving defenders accept the deal and come out of the fortress. But the second the king walks into Mount Zion and sees just how strong the walls are, he breaks his promise. Just like that. There's no way he's leaving a fortress this powerful standing. So he orders the walls to be torn down, and then he and his army hightail it back to the capital to deal with Philip.
So there you have it. A truce that was only signed because of a political emergency back home ends with a cynical act of betrayal. The war in Judea stops, at least for now, but only because an even bigger war for the throne is about to kick off. And it really leaves you with a question, doesn't it? When you're playing this kind of Game of Thrones, is peace ever really peace? Or is it just a pause, a strategic timeout before the next round of fighting begins?